From daybreak, sub-Saharan Africa's biggest slum is noisy, chaotic and unhealthy. There's violence, robberies, carjackings, vigilantes. Malaria and typhoid are common. The death rate for under-5s here is 3 times Nairobi's as a whole.
Among the many things that children learn early in their life is a sense of safety and a sense of threat. And we know that children who are in unstable or in threatening situations develop adaptive mechanisms to cope with that. And one of the more interesting things that's been illustrated by this work is the extent to which children who live in violent, threatening environments overinterpret threat in circumstances that other children, as they're growing up, might see as neutral. And this is adaptive. If you live in a violent, threatening environment, it is good for you to kind of have a short fuse.
Preschool is a safe space for the kids, somewhere they can develop peacefully and, in theory, become less violent adults.
The sun is there. The sun is there.
But preschool isn't just about avoiding stress. It's also about stimulating young brains when they're developing most rapidly.
I wash my face.
The child, of course, comes into the world with many gifts, but they need to be developed. The synapses in the brain need to be developed. The feelings need to be developed. The ability to have social contact needs to be developed. The creative elements need to be developed. The language needs to be developed. And you can't leave it till 5 or 6 years old. This all happens much earlier. The evidence is overwhelming that if you give them better stimulation in the early years and health and education and nutrition, that if you can get to the kids in those years, then your task in primary, secondary and tertiary is much better. And so it is not a waste of money, it's an investment.
The economic argument for early child development has gained enormous strength, and of course it's very persuasive to governments because it's about how much money they might get back on their investment. And I'm not going to discount that as an argument, but it cannot be the basic argument. It cannot be the main argument. The main argument must be a human rights argument. Governments ignore the early years at their peril. It's a curious thing that most people recognise just what the importance of the early years are in everyday life with their own children, and spend huge amounts of attention trying to get it right during those precious years of the early years. But in policy terms, actually, the early years have always been neglected. And failing to look for effective ways of improving children's life prospects and their quality of life now, which is that human rights principle, is something that governments cannot ignore.
"30 years ago, Rabia was a working mum from an Istanbul shantytown. Baby daughter Ceren, well, there was a creche and relatives. But in 1983, Rabia and Ceren became part of another famous study. There was now preschool for Ceren, and Rabia was trained to interact, play and read more. For over 2 decades, researchers followed as many of the group as they could. They compared the children to peers in a control group whose mothers had not been trained.
Young adults who had the early intervention were more successful than the other group, and this was really a remarkable finding.
Today, Ceren's a successful architect. She has her own child. She's passing on the parenting skills her mother was taught to the next generation.
Wouldn't most of these other children have caught up in the end anyway?
No. No, on the basis of what we know, on the basis of research, indeed they do not. If left on their own, they do not really make it in life. What is more likely to happen is reproducing the poverty and the same kind of life. The big lesson here is by improving children's early environment, immediate environment, we can offset the detrimental effects of poverty in the world and possibly even of violence.
I'm not saying that science has all of the answers to everything that ails all societies around the world in early childhood, but there's no question at all, that we're learning more and more about how the early foundations for learning and physical and mental health and behavioral regulation, which includes the possibility of violent behavior later on, the foundations are built in early childhood. What the basic principles of neuroscience tell us is that it's better to get brain development right from the beginning. And if we build a strong foundation in the very beginning of life, we get much better outcomes in the long run, and for actually less money, less cost, than the much greater price that's paid for trying to fix things down the road.
I have a dream. We know that poverty is a product of malnutrition, poor education, and poor stimulation. And from this, we believe that investment in education, health, and nutrition is important. And we believe in the early stimulation of our children. We are convinced we should work with children from the earliest age. And we're going to form a new society of children. We'll build a new generation of children. They'll be more successful and prosperous children, and they'll contribute effectively towards a peaceful future for our country.